I was a few miles outside the city when I got the call. My heart skipped a beat as I looked at the phone, seeing my mother's name flash across the screen. There was an urgency in her voice when I answered. "Son, I think someone's following me." Her word struck me like a punch to the gut. My mother, a woman who'd lived through more than most could imagine, didn't get scared easily. Yet, tonight, her voice cracked. "Where are you, Mom? What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know, but I'm on the way home, and I think someone's tailing me. I'm on Highway 47, and there's this black SUV that's been behind me for miles. They keep switching lanes, getting too close." I slammed my foot down on the gas, adrenaline surging through me. My mind raced, instinct kicking in. I knew what this meant. "Stay calm. Don't stop the car. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Keep driving straight." The line went dead before I could say another word. I cursed under my breath and hit the accelerator harder, weaving in and out of traffic, my eyes scanning the roads ahead. Something didn't feel right. As I neared the turnoff for Highway 47, I saw the glow of flashing lights up ahead. The streetlights flickered in the distance, casting long shadows over the empty road. I didn't know who the hell these people were, but if they were going after my mother, they were going to regret it. I reached the corner of Highway 47, and my heart dropped into my stomach. I could see the SUV parked at the side of the road, its lights off now, casting an eerie stillness over the scene. My mother's car was up ahead, the engine still running but with the door slightly ajar. I didn't slow down. My foot pressed harder on the gas as I pulled up beside her car, skidding to a halt. My instincts screamed at me, telling me this wasn't just some random threat. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. I jumped out, scanning the area, every muscle in my body on high alert. And then I saw them. 2 officers, their guns drawn, standing in front of my mother's car. My mother was sitting in the driver's seat, her hands raised, her face pale but defiant. She looked over at the officers, but her expression was full of confusion, as if she couldn't understand why they were aiming their weapons at her. "Mom!" I shouted, rushing forward, my voice cracking with the intensity of the moment. "Get out of the car, now!" But the officers didn't seem to care. They didn't recognize me. They were too caught up in whatever story they had built in their heads. One of them shouted at her to get out of the vehicle. "Get on the ground," the officer barked, his voice full of command and aggression. My blood boiled. This was a setup. My mother wasn't some criminal. She wasn't the threat here. The moment I stepped closer, the officer's hand jerked toward me. "Stay back," he yelled, his finger tightening on the trigger. Everything in me screamed to act, to show them who I was, what I was capable of. But I knew, if I didn't play this carefully, things could escalate quickly. And then, without warning, the officer's finger moved. "Get down," he shouted again, but the words barely left his mouth before the sound of gunfire rang out. The shots rang in my ears like thunder, each one reverberating through my chest. My mother's face contorted in pain, her body jerking from the force of the bullets. Time seemed to freeze as I watched her slump forward, blood pooling beneath her as the officers stood there, staring in shock at what they had just done. I felt a rage unlike anything I'd ever known. My body surged forward instinctively, my mind a blur of calculated movements. I didn't have time to think. I reached the officer who had fired, grabbing his gun hand before he could even react. He gasped, looking up at me with wide eyes, fear flickering across his face as he realized who I was. The last thing he expected was for someone like me to be standing in front of him. "Let go of me," he shouted, trying to wrestle free, but I didn't let go. I was a wall, my grip like iron, the adrenaline pumping through me making me stronger than I'd ever felt. "I'm Delta Force," I said, my voice low, like a promise, as I twisted his wrist just enough to make him drop his weapon. His partner, frozen in place, had no idea what to do. He stood there, gun still raised, but he wasn't aiming at me. He was frozen in shock. I could see the panic in his eyes. But that wasn't my problem. My problem was the officer who had pulled the trigger. I glanced back at my mother's car. Her face was pale now, eyes closed. There was no time to lose. "Get her to safety," I snapped to the second officer, pointing toward the SUV. He didn't move at first, unsure, his hands trembling slightly as he realized he'd been on the wrong side of this. But then he nodded, his feet almost moving on their own. I dragged the first officer to his knees, making sure he stayed down. He was terrified, rightfully so. And then, I turned to the second officer, still in the midst of his internal battle, and spoke again, colder this time. "If you want to live, you'll do exactly what I say." The officer hesitated for a split second, his eyes darting between me, his partner, and the bloody scene unfolding before him. But something in the tone of my voice, cold and unwavering, seemed to break through whatever confusion he was battling. His training kicked in. He ran to my mother's side, leaning down to check her pulse, then frantically started to drag her out of the car. I could see the fear in his eyes, he knew what he was dealing with now, but it was too late for second chances. I stood over the first officer, keeping him down with my knee pressing into his back, my face just inches from his ear. "Listen carefully," I whispered. "You made a grave mistake. Now you're going to help me save her, or you'll never walk again." I could feel him stiffen under my weight. His breath came in shallow gasps. The sound of my voice, the authority that I carried, he understood now that I wasn't some bystander. I was someone who could end his career, or worse. "You're gonna need a medic," the second officer said, his voice tight as he finally managed to drag my mother clear of the car. I could tell he wasn't sure if she was alive anymore. But I wasn't willing to make that call yet. I took a step back, keeping my eyes on the first officer. He was sweating, nervous, but trying to maintain control of the situation. He reached for his radio, but I slapped his hand away before he could make the call. "You're not calling anyone," I growled. "You're going to do exactly as I say. Move her to the road, keep her covered, and if you're lucky, she'll survive." I wasn't thinking rationally anymore. The only thing in my mind was getting her help. My mother's life was on the line, and every moment that passed was a moment closer to losing her forever. The second officer looked up at me, his face full of fear. "We need backup, there's no way we can handle this on our own." "You're not calling anyone," I repeated, louder this time. "Get her into the SUV. Now." The officer didn't argue. He knew his life was on the line. He picked my mother up and, with the assistance of his partner, managed to get her into the back of the SUV. I stood, my legs shaking from the adrenaline, staring at the scene. The moonlight cast long shadows across the road, and for the first time, the quiet felt deafening. I turned to the officer who had fired. His eyes were filled with terror now, but there was no time for him to process it. "Get in the car," I ordered. I forced the officer into the front seat of the SUV, slamming the door shut behind him. I didn't give him a chance to speak, didn't care about his protests. The only thing that mattered was my mother. The only thing that mattered was getting her help before it was too late. The second officer, still in shock but following orders, jumped into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and I barked my command, "Drive. Fast." The SUV lurched forward, the tires screeching against the asphalt. I didn't look back. I couldn't. All I could think about was my mother, lying there, barely clinging to life, and the two officers who had turned her into a casualty of their own ignorance. We sped through the dark roads, my mind racing with thoughts of how this went so wrong. I could feel the weight of my past bearing down on me. I was Delta Force. I had faced death before, had been through hell in some of the most hostile places on Earth. But nothing, felt like this. As we neared the nearest hospital, I could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles up ahead. We made it just in time. I jumped out of the car before it even came to a full stop, rushing to the back. The second officer had already opened the door to let the paramedics take over. My mother was pale, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. I watched as the medical team moved with precision, taking over from the officers who had, just moments ago, pulled the trigger. The same officers now stood off to the side, hands on their heads, trying to comprehend the chaos they'd caused. The first officer, still shaking, avoided my gaze. He knew. He knew he had made the ultimate mistake, and I could see the guilt in his eyes. But it didn't matter. There was no room for mercy here. Get in the back, I told him. Stay out of my way. He didn't argue. He knew his place now. I stood in silence, watching the paramedics work on my mother. The seconds felt like hours. Then, finally, one of them looked up. She's stable. She's going to make it. A deep breath I didn't realize I'd been holding escaped from my lungs. My mother was going to be okay. But the officers, their lives were forever changed. And I knew one thing for certain, they would never forget the name of the man they tried to take down.